I was at a career night at Columbia High School in 1981, and I met a recruiter from the Marine Corps, and I thought that it would have been a good option for me coming out of high school. I wasn't really at the time looking to go to college. I went later to college. When I went in the Marines, I was 18. When I went into Beirut, I was 20 years old. When you first go into the Marine Corps, you go east of the Mississippi. Marines go to Parris Island. West of the Mississippi, they go to San Diego, and that's about a 3-month training for basic training, boot camp. And then I went to Parris Island, and after that, I went to 29 Palms to be a field radio operator and communicator. When I got with the 6th with the 8th Marines, I was in 3rd Battalion, 8th Marines. So that was probably, I would say, in '82. The history of Beirut, there's been civil wars, mostly along religious lines, and also other countries got involved. Syria was involved, and Israel got involved. But there's been religious wars in Lebanon throughout history. In the 1950s, the Marines were there for the same basic reasons. The country, they were all throughout Lebanon. The country was, like I said, the Civil War was really going bad there, and they created a multinational force. It wasn't just Americans, it was Italians and French, but the Italians and French were in close proximity to us. They were trying to quell the violence, and it was a peacekeeping force to try and, sort of like what you see with the UN peacekeepers now, they send them into hotspots to try and quell the violence. I did support it at the time, and I still do. There were mistakes made once we were there, but which cost a lot of people their lives, but it was a noble cause. It was a peacekeeping mission. I was proud to serve my country. Sure, there were times when we were scared and worried. It would be disingenuous to think that there aren't times when you get scared. It was almost when I arrived in Lebanon, it was almost a surreal. I'll never forget, because, like I said, there was a lot going on. The multinational force was pulling out, and we had arrived. We had flown in off ships on helicopters, and the helicopter ride itself was a pretty wild experience. They stayed low. They wouldn't go above. You have to picture flying through New York City, and they wouldn't go above the highest buildings. When I got into Beirut, the last units of the multinational force had pulled out, and I was part of what they called the external security force. The American embassy had been blown up, and American diplomats were working out of the British embassy, and I was part of the external security force, which we secured a city block around the British embassy for security purposes. It actually was one of the first terror attacks that we had experienced, and it's no different than what we're experiencing now. There's a lineage that runs from that through 9/11 and up until our war on terror now. So it was a very early experience that we had dealing with terrorists. Over 200 Marines and other service members were killed when the truck ran into the Marine barracks. Most of the Marines that were killed were in there sleeping. It was about what I expected. It was, there was a lot of damage already from prior battles that were fought around there, and the one thing I didn't expect was the warmth of the people. I mean, they loved us. They treated us well. And you kind of learn once you're there that most of them just want to raise their kids and get, go out and work and not be bothered with what was going on. Most of my interactions were all positive. The Lebanese people couldn't have been friendlier, and they treated us well. We interacted all the time out on guard posts with different militia members, whether they're from the different religious groups. They all had their own militias, and we would interact with them on a daily basis. Well, my primary job was a field radio operator, so I handled communications from the ships back to shore, and secondary, I stood up security posts when needed. Yeah, there wasn't a problem carrying them out, and we were given the tools we needed to do it. The communications was always up and down. That was always something that we had to deal with. Every night there was some sort of battle going on, and we kind of sat in the middle of the factions that were fighting. So, different nights. There was 1 or 2 nights that I'll never forget where that really picked up. We actually got into Beirut in February of '84 and pulled out around August. I think at that point, a lot of people, especially after the bombing, they wanted us out. I think the public back here, I wasn't here, but I think a lot of the public wanted us out of there. I think it was that there were a lot of mistakes, and I think it was a mark on Reagan, when the over 200 Marines and soldiers were killed. Yeah, the military leaders didn't want us in hardened buildings. The American military leaders, and there was political decisions that were made that kept us in hardened buildings. Prior to the bombing, the Marines that were there didn't have rounds in their weapons. They were unloaded. Whoever had to engage with somebody would have to load their weapon. When I got there, our weapons were loaded. But prior to that, prior to the bombing, that was one of the other mistakes I think that were made. They put you into a war zone without, loaded weapons. So, well, there were different factions that were fighting, and they had already blown up the American embassy. They had already blown up the Marine barracks. So, they were terror groups. There were multiple terror groups within Lebanon that were looking to attack the embassy. No, the government, actually while we were there, they had elected a president. The government was fairly stable. We rotated out as we normally do between the 8th Marines, so it was our time to just rotate out. We were the last Marines there because they had stood up the new American embassy, and there's a Marine detachment to the embassy. So we pulled out. We were the last 100 Marines ashore, other than the embassy Marines, but part of from multinational to external security force group. Yeah, I still often think about it. It was an experience. It's an experience that I'll never forget. So yeah, I reflect on it to this day. I've always been proud of my service in the Marine Corps, and I think that we did some good in Lebanon. Even the small detachment we had there, we controlled the city block, and I'll never forget. The people were very upset when we left, because we had provided security and stability to them, which there was nowhere else in the city that had that.
All right, that's good.